Welcome to Patients at Risk, a discussion of the dangers that patients face when physicians are replaced with non-physician practitioners. I'm your host and the co-author of the book Patients at Risk, The Rise of the Nurse Practitioner and Physician Assistant in Healthcare, Dr. Rebecca Bernard. Today, I'm joined by psychiatrist Dr. Rashida Gray to discuss the ins and outs of owning your own practice and her tips to help physicians own themselves. Dr. Gray, welcome to the show. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
I am a psychiatrist, adult psychiatrist in Richmond, Virginia. I, like many of your listeners, always wanted to be a physician and always wanted to go out and change the world as a doctor. But in medical school, really fell in love with psychiatry, have worked at two health systems before transitioning to private practice.
So was there something that happened that pushed you to owning yourself because you worked for somebody else first, right?
I should start by saying this was never the plan. But again, life happens. Originally, I worked in academic medicine. So that was from 2007 to 2011, which doesn't seem so long ago, but man, medicine was very different back then. And so that was my first job. And I transitioned from that into a more, not quite for profit healthcare system. It's actually a nonprofit healthcare system. But as we all know, there isn't much difference. And transitioned to that in 2011. Again, medicine was very different in 2011 even.
Was that because of electronic health records coming in or change in payer status, or what were some of the big differences that you saw?
Insurance limitations considerably increased over that time period. Reimbursements considerably decreased for all physicians, particularly for psychiatrists. Just the what we refer to as sort of the corporatization of healthcare, and it's not something that everyone, the public, can necessarily see happening. You have to really be within healthcare to see how decisions are being made by more non-clinical persons that work within the healthcare system, physicians feeling like they're not being asked to be at the table or their opinions are being minimized. It continually sort of felt like profits were more important than patient care, but it's never that explicitly said in a meeting. You know, it's packaged in lots of other language and other decisions like, oh, we can't really hire someone else right now to help out with seeing patients. Sorry, we can't get you a scribe. No, we can't afford to have another nurse, and many, many other decisions that were made. Towards the end of my time, I had a medical directorship role over two hospitals. So very much a leader in the health system. And they opened an entire psychiatric emergency center with me at none of the meetings. And so things like that were happening, and it was becoming very clear to me that my voice was not being valued, my expertise was not appreciated, and frankly, my care and concern for patients was just not a priority at all. And after, I don't know how many, 10, 20 probably meetings where I would walk out in frustration or not sleep very well or crying, I just one day woke up and just said, I really don't have to stay here. And I'm saying it quickly. I mean, I've been speaking for just a few minutes, but that probably took about a year and a half to come to that realization. And that involved a therapist, a wonderful husband, talking to colleagues and family members. I mean, it was quite a road to get to that point. And when I left the nonprofit hospital, I really didn't know what I was going to do next. I actually had no idea. I was so exhausted by that point that I knew I was absolutely running on fumes. And it was just the first time in my life that I chose myself and my family's needs above patient care, healthcare, hospital, etc. And so I was on sort of a career sabbatical for about 9 months before I decided to open my own practice.
Well, first of all, I just want to say that your story just rings so true and so familiar to me. And that sort of epiphanal moment where you suddenly realize, like, wait a minute, like, I don't have to take this. I don't have to be abused. I don't have to do this. Why do
Mhm.
you think it takes us so long to get to that point? Is that something that you think is unique to physicians?
I do think physicians are more likely to have this difficulty. I also see it in lawyers. So I think it's sort of this very kind of type A personality, but more so than type A, just people who are really used to performing at a very high level all the time and used to being at the top of the class and being rewarded. And when that reward continues despite suffering, we don't recognize it as suffering. We honestly oftentimes cannot see it. And that is where you will see in physicians who are getting written up for professionalism problems, patient complaint at the extreme ends, substance abuse problems at work. It sort of starts to leak out in other ways, unfortunately, before we sometimes recognize in ourselves that we're just unhappy and that we're being mistreated. When I left for a while there, I would tell people that I had left my abusive partner. I also think that we sacrifice so much more than our peers in our education and training, and what propels us through that sacrifice is it's going to be great on the other side. It's I'm going to have all this freedom, all this money, all this status, and change the world. And you get to the other side after you've given up your 20s and it potentially looks not quite like you had expected it.
Talk to our audience about how you came to that decision to
Mhm.
open your own practice, and talk about that journey.
So my journey is that I never thought I would open a private practice, did not grow up around business people in my family. I honestly couldn't even say I really was very great with finances or budgets or spreadsheets or anything like that. I think I am like most listeners. I was very good at science, very good at math, very good student, knew how to take tests, remember a lot of information, regurgitate it. I'm a kind and compassionate person. I'll be a doctor. When I realized it was time to look for another job or figure out what was going to be next for me, I originally thought I would leave medicine. I looked for jobs and I could not find anything that I was interested in. The primary issue I was coming up against was just every job looked the same. It was very easy to tell. You're going to be overworked, you're going to be underpaid. You could tell from the job descriptions, the initial interviews, you could just kind of tell who was really making the decisions and what their priorities were. And so after realizing I really wasn't probably going to find a job, I had started considering what else could I possibly do. And that was the journey. That was several months. That included therapy, gardening, exercise. I was able to get in with a physician coach who still needed to acquire her hours and was offered this free coaching. I just woke up one day and she was offering free coaching. It was group coaching for maybe 15 of us for several weeks. And that really did help me to start seeing the possibilities of what I could do after working with a healthcare system. What also was helpful was several podcasts that I started listening to, podcasts that really kind of address just all the different things you can do with a medical degree, and hearing people's personal stories talking about how they had transitioned to pharma or some form of healthcare writing or expert witnessing, teaching, etc., and private practice. Long, long list of things. So that was really helpful to go, okay, I'm not the only one. Other people leave and they find somewhere to land and be happy and successful. Joining Facebook groups, which I was always on Facebook, but not really engaged with Facebook. We can certainly discuss all the criticisms of Facebook. But while working with the physician coach, we really identified that if private practice was going to be an option, I had a list of fears that I needed to work through because that was the biggest obstacle. And I literally just wrote down each of those fears and worked through each of them. And the Facebook group was really helpful because it just was, I don't know, 150 50, some psychiatrists who have private practices of all sizes who are willing to answer my question at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday or 4 a.m. on a Thursday. And, so that crowdsourcing of information, just hearing other people say, no, you're not crazy. No, this makes sense. This is what I did. This is what I did. That really helped get me over, I guess we'll say the starting line to say, okay, this is actually possible. This is actually doable. And I think it's being willing to ask those questions, I think, is hard for physicians. We're used to always having the right answer. We are uncomfortable being in the position of the person with the least amount of knowledge about a subject. And so you have to really kind of confront that, the financial fears, the fears about business, the fears about failure, all of those are huge. And you absolutely have to honor them and be honest about them in order to get to the other side, or at least find people who can help support you as you're working through those things.
I think it's so interesting how starting our own practice is like one of the last things that we think about when we're looking at all of these options. Like, okay, I remember thinking like, could I be a cruise ship doctor? Could I, of course, medical writing? And you start thinking of all these things. And then it's like the obvious thing staring at you in your face,
Yeah.
which our forefathers and foremothers would have been like, I mean, hello, open your practice. And I think
Yeah.
we've been told that we can't do it, that it's too complicated, that we
Mm-hmm.
don't know about business. But then when you start digging into it, you realize it really isn't as complicated as we fear it's going to be. So I think our messaging here, Dr. Gray, is to tell our listeners, like, listen, we've done this successfully. It's not rocket science, and you can do it too. So you made that decision. So talk about then what your steps were to going ahead and opening your practice. Did it turn out to be more difficult or easier than you thought? How did the process go?
I would say it went easier, definitely, which is so true. I would say typically when we face our fears, what helped me to really start getting excited. And so I think there's two things. It's like you have to do the really like the administrative, the work, but there has to be some other side to it that's fun and exciting or creative. You have to have two. It can't just feel like work. And so for me, coming up with the name of my practice, that's a creative endeavor that honestly a lot of business coaches and books will tell you, like, that's not what's important. You need a business plan. I disagree. Disagree. I think there has to be something fun and creative early on to get you excited. So coming up with the name, coming up with a logo, coming up with branding and color scheme and things like that. You can't get lost there. You can't stay there forever. But that will really sort of light the flame. And that gets you dreaming. And then you start dreaming, and you're like, what are the colors of the office going to be? And what's the furniture going to look like? And where do I want people to sit? Or what kind of chair do I want them to sit in? And what's the focal point? And, that dreaming, I think, gets squashed inside of us at a certain point in our training. There's sort of some precipice that we cross where we just want to make it to the end. And when that happens, the dreaming is just kind of starts to disappear. I just think that's something I've noticed within myself. I don't know if other people sort of relate to that. And so this was just this, really amazing moment of like, oh, I didn't even realize this was still inside of me. I thought this part of me had died. So the practical pieces were finding a lawyer. It only took, I mean, I think I talked to one or two of my friends, and I was able to get referred to a small business lawyer, a woman small business lawyer. That's all she did, was focus on small businesses. And she also did a little bit of small business coaching, a little bit, just things to consider and think about. You need a lawyer. But I think even that sometimes is scary to people. It's like, oh, that's going to be expensive. And oh, that's going to be, ask around. You'd be surprised who might be an attorney and can help you with just drafting your paperwork or just looking over your paperwork. Now, I will be very honest in saying most psychiatrists copy each other's paperwork. Now,
We,
everyone should have their own attorney look over it, but there's a lot of copying going on.
we do that in the direct primary care world a lot too. We tend to, and most of the time we're sharing it with each other because,
Yeah.
we want to help each other succeed.
And there's no point in reinventing the wheel. An accountant, lucky enough to get referred to a small business accountant, a woman-owned business who also could provide a little bit of, small business coaching. There are resources available that we don't realize because we're in this actually tiny little world called medicine, which is not the whole world. And once we are willing to leave that world, you will find there are so many free resources for small businesses. And there are so many people that want to help you. There are incubators. I just tell people just Google or go on Facebook and kind of look up business in your city. And, they'll say, hey, come to our coffee. We meet every month. We get together and just kind of talk about a certain topic. We get to know each other's businesses and help each other out. And you need that kind of support and role modeling outside of medicine, I think is really helpful too.
What about marketing? Did you find it hard to get your patient client base going?
I knew that there were not a lot of psychiatrists in Richmond. So I will say, I knew I was not opening a business with a huge amount of risk of not being successful. I will be very honest in saying that, but I also wasn't sure. So I did a couple of things. I made flyers and drove around to lots of primary care offices, urgent care, concierge practices, and dropped off my flyer and business cards. If I had the opportunity, I'd say hello to the office manager. Going to the therapist offices, probably, it's hard to say. I sort of feel like each office yielded a patient at least. And then one person tells another person. Most people come to me through their therapist refers them to me directly. I do use Psychology Today, which is really the largest directory of mental health professionals in America. I have a website, which I developed myself using Wix.com. Very, very easy to use. I am not great with technology. I would consider myself to be slightly above average, but Wix makes it very, very easy and it's very affordable. And I can personally update and change it when I need to. I don't have to call someone to do that. You have to get a location. This is unbelievable, but I found it on Craigslist.
I love it. All my furniture, my EKG machine, all that came from Craigslist. So I'm a
Yep.
believer in that too.
It just was a serendipitous thing. And I don't know if you've had that experience too, but you'd be surprised when you're venturing into something that's scary and uncertain. You will get these signs that you are heading in the right direction and making the right decision. It was a sublet. It was an office sublet for an acupuncturist. And she had posted it, but hadn't gotten any real good leads. And she thought she had taken it down. And I called and she said, oh my God, I thought I had taken it down because we didn't get anybody. And I was like, well, I would love to come by and see the space. I'm just getting started and I really don't want to have to rent a huge office space. And so I came by and it, was just one office for me, two offices for the acupuncturist, and a nice sized waiting room and a little tiny kitchen area. That's all I needed.
So did you do this as a micro practice then? Did you have any staff or did you do it all yourself from the beginning?
This is a very good question. The one thing I would love to impress upon any psychiatrists that are listening is that it really does not take much money to start. Now, I do think it is critical if you are having an experience like mine where you feel like your current employment is not going to sustain you forever and you need to get out, you need to save money. You need to have some kind of savings just as a cushion when you're getting things started. So save those bonus checks or tax returns or just save from every check so you can have that. It makes it a lot easier and more fun and less stressful if you can still keep your lights on while you're figuring out the business part. And from start to finish, this probably took 2 months. Probably 2 months. Yes. I did not hire staff and was planning to just do everything myself. So, taking all the phone calls, everything. So I started completely on my own, just me. And I learned through the Facebook group that that's what most people do in psychiatry. A lot of people run their practices for years with just themselves. And I do think it is very doable. After about 6 months, I had made enough money and was feeling confident that this was going to be successful, that I was able to hire a virtual assistant. But that's it. It's just me and a virtual assistant. And I still sublet the same office space shared with an acupuncturist, and that has worked out pretty well. I am a self-pay practice, so there's no insurance, which I think eliminates another position probably that I would have to pay for. And so far, and I'm the only clinician. I'm the only one that sees patients in my practice.
So now that you are successful in your practice and things are, I guess it sounds like much better as far as your quality of life, or do you have any, would you ever go back to doing things the way you did? Would you ever be employed again, do you think?
So, a very good question. I would never say no because I know that life can happen. And I think that I'm very grateful for having a medical degree. I don't take that for granted in the ability to move through different type of career spaces. And I know that things can happen. And so, if one finds themselves in a situation where business is down, you know, it could happen. It would not be my first choice. It would not be my first choice. But I have done locums off and on, as the business was growing, which has sort of been a nice in between, um, to sort of supplement the income of the practice. And so, maybe that would be something I would consider. But I really think that entrepreneurship in medicine is very doable. And when there are challenges, you rise to the occasion and you solve them. If you're not getting enough patients, you've got to look at your marketing, you've got to look at your referral sources. Uh, you know, who have you not contacted recently that maybe could send patients to you? Do you need to charge more, et cetera? I mean, there are problems that will come up, but we're doctors and we solve problems every day.
One of the biggest frustrations for me when I was employed is that I would want to try things or I would have ideas because there are problems when you're employed too. The difference is when you're self-employed, you get to consider your options and implement change. And if that doesn't work out, try something else. And there's nobody in between you and that decision. So
Mhm.
you actually can affect change. So you don't have that feeling of impotence where you're just sitting here in a bad situation, but there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. So it's so empowering, I think, to own
Mhm.
yourself.
Completely agree. I can't tell you how many meetings that we would discuss a problem and offer solutions and nothing would happen. And so now I discuss with myself what the problem is and write out some solutions and decide which one to tackle first. It's so different. The challenges that you face in private practice, I know people find it very scary. You have to believe in yourself. And you have to remember all that you've accomplished, all the challenges you've overcome to get this far. Those skills will sustain you in private practice also. I think we have to sort of break free from the comfort of dependency in employment and recognize that the discomfort that can come along with being in private practice also means independence and freedom and autonomy and really being able to practice in a way that aligns with your values. And that's difficult to do when someone else signs your paycheck. I mean, and I think that applies across any industry, but breaking free from that, what I would consider really a false sense of comfort that comes with employment. I think if we could do that as physicians, I mean, I think healthcare could really radically change and improve. I also think that the competitive nature of doctors has really also worked against us. And like I said, when I was looking for information on how to start a practice, the resource where I had got the most information was therapists. And because a therapy practice is so similar to a psychiatric practice, like 90% of it applies to me, if not 95%. There is a plethora of resources for therapists. I mean, they have all kinds of coaching and workshops and webinars and podcasts and websites and blogs, all free. It is very hard to find that for us. It's really hard to find. And I think some of it is, we don't think about sort of monetizing some of that information, I think. But I also think we probably could just do a better job of sharing that information with each other about how we got started. And then the mid levels also, lots of information in YouTubes that they have to help each other out on how to start a practice.
That's so interesting. Well, this is why we're talking about it right now. And I happen to agree with you. I believe the only way to see systemic change in medicine is when physicians say no more, because we've talked, we've asked, we've begged, we've pleaded, and nothing changes. And I think until we just say, okay, then, well, sorry, we're out. I think if we did that more, we might see those in authority actually maybe consider making some changes, but I don't even know if that would work. But I think that's really the only answer. That I agree with you. We need to talk to our colleagues. We need to help each other, encourage each other. And you're doing that right now. So in our last couple of minutes, what advice or information do you give or would you share with people that are thinking about opening a practice?
Save your money. I think finances are a huge limiting factor for physicians to leave. But if you have a non-compete or if you have student loans, if you have money saved, that will sustain you during that time. Certainly psychiatry's overhead is much lower. So for other practices, you might need to look into other funding sources and allow yourself some time. That's another one. It may mean you step away for a few months and you're not working, but you need that time to think. You need that time to connect with yourself again and who you are and what your goals and values are. You need that time and then start branching out to find resources, people, information. It's out there and it's definitely doable and worth it.
Thank you so much to my guest, Dr. Rashida Gray. You can learn more about her practice at graymdpsychiatry.com. If you'd like to learn more about this topic, I encourage you to get the book Patients at Risk and my follow-up book, Imposter Doctors. And if you're a physician and you'd like to learn more about advocating for physician-led care and truth and transparency among healthcare practitioners, please join our group. It's called Physicians for Patient Protection. Our website is physiciansforpatientprotection.org. Also, we would love to have you join our podcast. If you're interested, just reach out to me through the website patientsatrisk.com. Thanks so much. We'll see you on the next podcast.